Premier Li is in Japan this week for the first official visit in 8 years and to attend a China-Japan ROK summit. How are warming ties among the three countries going to shape things in Northeast Asia, including the Korean Peninsula? And reported cases of rape are on the rise in India. What's behind this gruesome spike and how are Indians addressing the problem? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is in Japan for a three-day official visit this week. During his visit, Li attended the 7th China-Japan ROK summit and a reception commemorating the 40th anniversary of the signing of the China-Japan Treaty of Peace and Friendship. The first official visit by a Chinese premier to Japan in 8 years, Premier Li acknowledged that although the relationship between China and Japan has made some detours over the years, he hopes his visit can promote high-level exchanges between the two sides. He also emphasized the importance of maintaining long-term, healthy and stable bilateral ties. So what's the significance of the visit and the trilateral meeting? When ties warm up among China, Japan and the ROK, what's the implication for Northeast Asia? Joining me in the Beijing studio is Professor Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. Professor Rong, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Why has it taken 8 years for a Chinese premier to visit Japan? What has changed?
Well, it is really, to some extent, very unusual for bilateral relations between two countries like Japan and China, which they're so close, as we will say, the shared, just separated by a strip of waters, and with such a strong historical, cultural, and economic relationship. The reason why China and Japan will not be able to exchange a visit, a high-level visit, in the past 8 years, there was political difficulties created by the question of history and also territory, and mainly because of the wrong policy of the Japanese side, the government. So now 8 years have passed, and finally we have the Premier Li Keqiang visiting Japan, and also I think Prime Minister Abe has received an invitation to reciprocate the visit. So I thought that this visit is significant in the sense that it signifies that the relationship has been brought back to the right track and opened up a new era for pragmatic, stable and cooperation and long-term.
So if you're going to use an adjective to describe temperature, what adjective would you use now? For instance, I'm sure it's not cold, right? Is it cool? Is it warm? Is it warmer? Is it hot? What it is between China and Japan at this moment? And politically or economically, is there a difference?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. I think overall relationship is warming up, but I don't think it has reached the point that it's hot. Economically, I think it is pretty close, and we have seen the agreements that have been signed, and I think the statements that has been made, and more importantly, I think the potentialities that the two sides have feel if as the relationship is normalized and the scope and the potentiality is being exploited. I think this is possibly the reality of the relationship between China and Japan. This is possibly, I think, the life we are going to work with, and more importantly, there are other issues I think China and Japan should work together to manage.
So, for instance,
the differences. Yeah.
Right. You mentioned some differences. For instance, the Diaoyu Island issue, which China considers to be a controversy, which the Japanese side does not see as a controversy. Then we have the East China Sea issue or the South China Sea issue a couple of years ago, and we also have some other differences regarding Japan's attitude toward its history during the Second World War. And then we're talking about a huge economic potential. So how are these two countries going to manage their differences on these political issues so that their cooperation on the economic side are not derailed or can be boosted?
Yeah, at the political level, I think there's a very important sort of understanding that over the past 40 years and more, when China and Japan normalized the relationship, I mean, for these 4 decades and more, there were 4 very important political documents that have been signed. So we always say that the spirit of these political documents has to be upheld. And also important is that in November 2014, the relationship was really, really bad, and the 2 sides, through hard negotiation, reached the so-called 4-point principled agreement, how to manage and develop the relationship. All these things are very important. But the most important thing is that I think between China and Japan, that we call the political consensus, that the 2 sides see each other as partner for cooperation, not as threat. So if that political consensus is being upheld, I think political trust can build, providing a solid foundation for political foundation for the stable relationship.
Right. Premier Li said at a press conference on the sidelines of China's annual Legislative Council legislative session in March that if we have seen a spring in China-Japan relationship, we must also watch out for any possible return of chills. And many of my fellow media workers also noticed the kind of rather reserved facial expression or body language of Premier Li when the 3 leaders from the 3 countries were posing for a group photo. How would you why is China's attitude so cautious, let's say, at this moment, in comparison to what the Japanese is showing?
Well, I noticed that I would rather say that the impression is relatively or comparatively relaxed compared to other meetings. So this is an indication that the relationship is warming up. But it is true, as I said, between China and Japan, we have some differences. We have to face up. As you mentioned, that territorial disputes, maritime issues are always there. And fortunately, I think during this visit, there's one very important agreement or MOU that has been signed between the 2 countries after, again, very difficult, tough negotiation. That is, say, the mechanism agreement and mechanism on how for air and maritime communication. That would which was meant to provide a kind of mean to prevent miscalculations, to make sure that if there's some disagreement, how the 2 countries, particularly the 2, like for example, the 2 public vessels and the services can manage their differences. But the most important thing, I think, if you talk about the cautiousness for the relationship, is the Chinese side still, I think, have some sort of misgivings or concern that whether the Japanese side would honor the pledges that have been made with the important political documents.
Right,
so
whether the rewarming can be sustainable.
Exactly.
Let me get some Japanese perspective here. We are joined from Tokyo by Dr. Masahiro Kohara, professor of the Graduate School for Law and Politics at the University of Tokyo. Dr. Kohara, thank you very much for joining us today. How is Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's visit to Japan viewed by the Japanese people this time?
I think it's a very constructive visit to promote a better relationship between Japan and China. And both countries now are faced with the rise of protectionism and trade dispute with the United States. At that moment, it is very important for both countries, China and Japan, to commit and to strengthen the cooperation to protect the free trade frameworks in the world. And I think it's very timely. And I think the strengthening of the cooperation in trade and economic relations between 2 countries, it also provides strong driving forces for the Japanese business people. They are more enthusiastic to do a business in China, and promotes stronger economic relations between 2 countries. I think it's good for the prosperity and stability of entire Asia.
Mm-hmm. How do you look at the kind of a need, let's say, for this newfound rapprochement to be sustainable and steady in the time to come, in the long term? Because, as I said, the Chinese leadership has expressed some caution about whether or not there would be any possible return of chills.
You mean some ups and downs?
Right, in the future.
Possible
yeah, in the future.
In the future?
Yes.
Yes.
How
yes.
to prevent?
I think it.
Right.
Yes. I do research and study the international relations, and any relationship among countries, they have the shared interest, common interest, and conflicting interest. And I think, it is not unusual that Japan and China have these different, interests, shared interests and conflicting interests. And I think, the most important is to increase the shared interests and minimize, contain the conflicting interest. I think it's a good start for both leaders at the summit meeting in Tokyo this time, is to make such an approach to widen the win-win situations, win-win relationship, and to manage the pending issues which are difficult to resolve at this moment. I think this is a very good, wise diplomacy, as we can promote the healthy development of the relationship of two countries towards the future.
Right. Well, it's not just between China and Japan. We're also seeing the ROK President Moon Jae-in joining this trilateral summit, which was suspended for the past 2 years. So, Dr. Kohara, how do you look at the importance of better relations among these three regional countries at the moment we are seeing, especially given the very rapid development of things on the Korean Peninsula?
Yes, maybe three leaders, they acknowledge, they take lessons of the deteriorated relationship in the past decades among the three countries, and I believe they try to improve the relationship among the countries. It is a good driving forces to promote the resolution of, for instance, the Korean Peninsula issues, and also trade issues, etc. So now is that we witness the very strong momentum of improvement of the relationship among the countries. I think the Li Keqiang's, Premier Li Keqiang's visit, this is a good start to pave a way for the Prime Minister Abe's visit to China, and then the President Xi Jinping's visit to Japan, and it makes the relationships more stable between two countries.
Okay.
And I think it's good for the stability in Asia.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kohara. And coming back, last question to Professor Rong. We hear Chinese Premier Li Keqiang proposing the China-Japan ROK plus X cooperation. What is the X here? What is he talking about?
I think this is a very innovative and visionary way to present the trilateral cooperation. And I think by X, Premier Li meant to say that given the advantages and the comparative the complementarities between of the three countries and vis-a-vis other countries in the region, in East Asia, South Asia, and beyond, that if the three countries join hands by capitalizing their advantages and explore jointly for some areas in the fourth country, that would not only consolidate the cooperation between the three countries, but more importantly, that they would help contribute to the development and stabilities of the fourth country and the region at large.
Okay.
This is a very, I think, important way to look at the relationship.
We have to leave it there. Many thanks to my two guests, Rong, Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies, and from Tokyo, Dr. Masahiro Kohara, Professor of the Graduate School for Law and Politics at the University of Tokyo. And you have been watching The Point. I'll be right back after this short break. A teenager is fighting for her life after allegedly being raped and set on fire last Friday in India. The attack happened the same day as 16-year-old was burned alive after being raped in the same eastern state of Jharkhand. These two cases are the latest in India's growing number of violent crimes against women, which includes the rape and murder of an 8-year-old girl in January. What underlying factors have led to this alarming spike, and what are communities and the government doing or not doing to keep India's daughters safe? Joining me from New York is Dr. Shruti Kapoor, founder of Safety, a platform that educates and empowers women and girls against all forms of violence. Welcome, Dr. Kapoor. Now, last weekend, as I mentioned, not one but two rape cases emerged from the same state. Is this just a coincidence? Why Jharkhand? Why the same pattern? And why similar age?
It probably is just a coincidence, but having said that, you know, if you open the newspaper or read the news nowadays, you will see that rape cases are happening every single day. Just this morning, I went literally date by date and read about a rape case happening every single day, whether it's a young girl, whether it's a young woman, in some cases, you know, older women. So I think the number of rape cases that are being reported nowadays have gone up higher because of more awareness amongst the population and media. It has become common to talk about these. It's no longer really a taboo topic or a subject. And in this particular case, in the case of Jharkhand, it just so happened that the two cases, you know, were in the same state. It's not related. It was just a coincidence.
Well, as you said, there are a considerably higher number of cases. According to India's National Crime Records Bureau, there were nearly 39,000 alleged reported rapes in 2016. That's an increase of 12% on the previous year. In Delhi alone, the number of rapes reported each year has more than tripled over the last 5 years, registering an increase of 277%. Is India really that unsafe for girls and women?
Right. You know, rape is not just an Indian problem. India ranks globally at number 3 after India and Africa when it comes to rape cases. The reason we are seeing such large number of cases now coming forward or now being talked about in the media is because over the past 5 years since the Nirbhaya case happened in 2012, there has been a lot more awareness amongst the people, you know, awareness in terms of how to report crime, how to talk about sexual violence, how to go and file a case of rape in, you know, in a police office. So I think that's what we are seeing. That's why we are seeing a spike in the increase in numbers. It's not that India is, you know, the rape capital of the world. Rape has always existed across the global world. It's just that India is seeing a lot more of these cases now coming to the forefront because there is a lot more talk happening. There is more awareness amongst the community, amongst the media, and that is why we are seeing these spikes in numbers because of higher reporting now.
Well, some people believe that a preference for boys also could have contributed to increased crimes against women. The northern state of Haryana, for instance, which records the highest number of gang rapes in India, has the worst sex ratio in the country. What is your take on this argument?
Absolutely. So India, unfortunately, right now has a sex ratio of 116 boys to every 100 girls. That is abysmal. It is much higher than the global standards of 105 boys to 100 girls, and as a result of which, like you rightly pointed out, there is a very strong preference to boys over girls. And what is happening is, and is still happening unfortunately, despite of all the awareness and the education to save the girl child, there is sex selective abortion, which means parents are still able to find out the sex of the child much before it's given birth, and they have a choice to abort it. So there are definitely more number of boys compared to girls, and it is true that it could, because of this skewed gender ratio, we are seeing higher levels of violence. There have been very few studies done yet to really say that this is causing the higher number of rapes. As you know, rape could be caused for numerous reasons, including men want to take revenge. For some, it's just a form of entertainment. But yes, the skewed sex-gender ratio can be a part of the problem, which needs to be addressed by the government and people in India.
Mm-hmm. Another trend which seemed to have also emerged is that India's crime records show that reported rapes of minor children have more than doubled between 2012 and 2016, and that 4 in 10 women rape victims, for instance, were minors. Why are children being targeted, if at all?
I think this brings us back to the bigger question: why do men rape? Why do people rape? Rape is used as a weapon to gain power over somebody, and who could be more powerless than a young child, than a young girl who has absolutely no physical strength to fight off a rapist, who probably is even unaware of what is happening, doesn't know of her rights, is the most vulnerable, and therefore, when you think at the bigger picture as to why men or why people rape, it's probably, they're targeting more younger girls because it's easier to kidnap them, it's easier to have them under control, and it's easier to execute power over smaller children compared to women who are, probably more aware, a little bit stronger in physical build and strength. And that's why, again, we are seeing more of these cases coming forward. Again, child rapes have always existed in our country, but it is, more awareness in the recent years that we are seeing a spike in these numbers, and more cases are coming forward in the media.
Mm-hmm. One of the details that caught people's attention was that in one of the 2 cases that we started this discussion with, the alleged rapers were punished very lightly. I mean, they were ordered by the village council to do 100 sit-ups plus a fine, which was, okay, relatively heavy. So is the kind of low cost of offense that could have done something to, make people go ahead and do these crimes? How are rapists punished in India?
You have identified it absolutely correctly. In this particular case of Jharkhand, the accused, like you mentioned, were asked to do 100 sit-ups and pay a fine of probably $750, which is nothing, which again goes back to the larger picture of how patriarchal our society is, and the value of a woman's life. A woman is often thought of a second-class citizen in the Indian society. By asking a rapist to do 100 sit-ups, the village council is sending a signal that we don't hold much value for a woman or a girl's life, that rape is really a common norm in our society, and these rapists,
right,
they are not being punished harshly. There is, the conviction rate is so low in India, it's only 27%. So even
right,
if a rapist is caught,
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you here.
All the rapists
I have to interrupt you here. We're joined by another guest, Baka Doot, an award-winning TV journalist and anchor, joining us from New Delhi. I have really just about 3 minutes to go. So, Mr. Doot, thank you very much for joining us. In a recent article, you wrote that these recent cases have revealed India's class bias, especially in the media, saying the Delhi rape of 2012 was close to the bone. It could have been any one of us or those who watched and read us. Tell us more about what class bias means in the reporting about these cases.
Well, I think what is true, and as a journalist I have to own up to it, is that when a rape occurs in a socio-economic strata that is the same as that of our viewers, we tend to focus on it much more. But when it happens far away in a village, for example, what happened to this 12-year-old tribal girl in Jharkhand, even though it is just as horrific, because every rape is equally horrific, there is no hierarchy to rapes, we tend to give less space to those incidents of sexual abuse and sexual violence. And I think we forget our own privilege. I think we forget that when class and caste in a deeply unequal and stratified society such as India combine, it is actually much worse for those who live in villages, for those who live on the margins of society, for those whose stories don't even get told. So I think what I was talking about was the fact that the media and big media tends to focus on those horrors that are closer to the background of their audiences and leave the stories of millions of Indians untold.
Now, last month, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said India's daughters will receive justice, but critics say Modi and the ruling party are not doing enough. What do you say, Ms. Doot?
Well, I think a flashpoint for our conversation around gender equality and sexual violence came from the state of Jammu and Kashmir when there was an incident involving the rape and murder of an 8-year-old child. Now, what happened very shamefully and horribly in that particular case is that we saw local politicians, not just from the ruling BJP, but from several parties actually coming out to defend and speak in support of the men who had been accused of raping and murdering this little child. And at that point, it took the Prime Minister Modi's intervention. The lawmakers who had defended the men accused of child rape and child murder were removed from the state government. But by then, the atmosphere was already so toxic. And I think a lot of people felt very cynical that if our lawmakers are going to come out and defend men who have been accused of child rape and child murder instead of leaving it to the courts, then, you know, the call by politicians, including at the highest level, for saving our daughters,
we have to leave it there.
I have to interrupt. And I think there's a great deal of cynicism.
Ms. Doot, I have to leave it there. Thank you so much. We're just seconds away from the end of the show. Many thanks to my two guests, Baka Doot and Dr. Shruti Kapoor. And that is it for this edition of The Point from me, Li Xin. I hope this kind of heinous crime does not happen again in India or anywhere in this world. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.